For more on the Ukraine war, let's bring in Mike Vickers, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And before working for the Defense Department, Vickers was in the CIA, where he played an important role in Operation Cyclone, the CIA program to arm the Islamist Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War. Well, Mike, somebody who has devoted a very significant portion of his life fighting against Soviet and Russian influence, what's your general take of what's happening at this moment in Ukraine?
Sure. Well, nice to be with you. Putin has gotten himself into a real no-win situation. His forces haven't been able to achieve their objectives. He's rallied the whole world against him, or almost the whole world. His economy is being crushed. And so I wouldn't be surprised if at some point he starts looking for a way out. The longer this goes on, the more Russian power will be destroyed, the economy and military power. This is likely be a protracted insurgency equal to or worse than what the Soviets suffered in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And if he does something really horrific, he might bring in U.S. and NATO forces.
Let's look a little further back. Nearly 4 million Ukrainians died as a result of the Soviet farming collectivization under Joseph Stalin. And Stalin forced the Russification of Ukraine in what was really a blatant attempt to quash Ukrainian national identity. How do you see President Putin's Soviet mindset justifying his invasion?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, during the latter part of the Cold War, the Soviets had a Brezhnev doctrine named after Communist Party General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, that once a state went communist, it couldn't go back. And that justified the invasion of Afghanistan, the suppression of Hungary, and the suppression of Czechoslovakia and other actions. And Putin has a similar view in the sense that he wants to reconstitute at least imperial Russias, not Soviet power, but Soviet empire, but imperial Russias. And he sees Ukraine as part of Russia and therefore needs to be conquered and brought back in. The other former Soviet republics, with the exception of the Baltics, are under Russian sway to one degree or another, and that's his aim.
While working with the CIA, you worked with Islamic militants to fight the then Soviet Union to abandon Afghanistan. What might that tell you about what could constitute victory for Moscow at this moment in this war?
Sure. So if he's able to conquer Ukraine and absorb it, it will be a big blow for democracy. That's what he really fears in Ukraine, is democracy and the example that it sets, however imperfect it may be, and the example it sets for Russia. Putin, first and foremost, cares about sustaining his own rule. And if he were to win, and the only way he can win, let me be clear, is if the West backs off, or if he intimidates the West into not supporting Ukrainian resistance and not sanctioning Russia very heavily in a way that we never have before. And so if he were to succeed in that, Putin's aims are well beyond Ukraine. He wants to weaken or break up NATO, wants to weaken the United States, and compared to our other great power rival, China, China's aim eventually is to rise above the United States and be the dominant power in the international system. Putin knows he can't do that, and so therefore his strategy has always been to try to weaken the United States, including interfering in our elections.
When we saw the Soviet Union break up back in 1991, we saw a number of the former states there join NATO as quickly as they could, but a handful have remained close to the Kremlin during this period of time. How do those relationships factor into this conflict right now?
So, NATO expansion started actually a little later in 1997 with the Eastern European countries and then others, including the Baltic states. And some applied for membership later. Ukraine and Georgia, for example, applied in 2008, but have been denied entry for a variety of reasons. The Germans and the French have opposed it, arguing that they haven't met NATO standards yet for anti-corruption and other things. There was another opportunity after Russia invaded Ukraine's eastern territories and seized Crimea in 2014, but still no success. Other states haven't applied, largely because they're more under Russia's sway or China's sway.
So the West has provided defensive assistance to Ukraine. It continues to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine. Do you see a situation where NATO may be forced to decide whether or not to make a more significant commitment to defending Ukraine?
Yeah, so I mean, the assistance we provided before the crisis was fairly modest. When Russia invaded in 2014, we didn't even provide them with lethal weapons. A little later, in 2017, we first started providing some weapons, but the assistance was modest until really the month before the Russian buildup. And then the West, and the U.S. in particular, really started supplying anti-aircraft missiles like we used in Afghanistan, and anti-tank missiles and others. And that's ramped up even more in the weeks since the invasion. Promises from many, many countries to send in Stinger anti-aircraft missiles and anti-tank missiles, et cetera.
What has this conflict shown the world about Russia's military readiness?
Let me answer your other question first. I apologize.
Sure,
so what could trigger something beyond that, beyond extended support for Ukrainian defense forces and then Ukrainian resistance if it comes to that? And that would be something horrific that Russia does, leveling cities, indiscriminate killing of civilians, using chemical weapons, perhaps. That might cause the direct or a Russia attack on NATO territory because the supply of weapons is hurting them, attacking a frontline state. And so then he would be taking on a war with NATO, and there may be more direct intervention. Right now, the policy of the West is just to do this indirectly. Then you asked the question about readiness, and I apologize for not finishing my previous thought. So the big shocker here, and it must be a real shock in the Kremlin, is the Germans have not only started agreeing to supply advanced weapons to Ukrainian defense forces, but they've also made a special appropriation of 100 billion plus euros to their defense budget, and said they will increase their budget substantially before their targeted date of or right away, I should say, before their targeted date of 2024. So Putin's got some real unpleasant shocks here in terms of the Western response.
We appreciate the historical perspective. It seems quite certain we're watching another chapter of history at this moment. Mike Vickers, thank you for your time.
Thank you.